Good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Thank you for waiting, and even more, thank you very much for being with us today. Now, as it was announced in the invitation, today we will be talking about the new release of the MyQ X, the version 10.2. Now, today's session will be slightly bit more technical than it's usual for these kind of webinars, but there's actually a reason behind that because I would like to just demonstrate the way these features I'll be talking about are actually operating. So don't worry, it will not be like too much. It will be perfectly sufficient for anyone from the sales to technicians. I believe everyone will be able to find the exact thing in this webinar. Now, if there'll be something that you would not understand or you would need more information because that will be a feature that is really interested for you or your customers, do not hesitate to stop me at any point and use the actually you will not be able to stop me, my bad. Sorry, different kind of meeting. So sorry for that. Instead of that, use the QA session, which probably you can access in the top part of your application, and I will try to answer those questions. Apology for this little misunderstanding at the beginning. So please use the QA session, and at the end of the webinar I will be able to answer any question you might potentially have. So, just for the introduction, I don't think I have to read out loud as I do in many of my videos. You can also see it on the screen. Instead of the actual introduction, we can actually jump into the topic you are waiting for. So, what can be expected as part of today's webinar? First, we will start with the most important part, the most important thing of the version 10.2, and that is the MyQ Desktop Client 10.2. I know some of you have not yet seen any of our marketing materials or any of our introductions. You might just think, why we start with a desktop client? Because, it's some application that is intended for users, a computer, something that should help in a case of a failure, like a backup and stuff. But, it's not that. And actually, it's not only that. As you will see as part of my presentation, now the MyQ Desktop Client is actually one of the most important features of the 10.2 because it's focusing on the printer and driver provisioning to a user station. So basically, it's an extension of 10.2 which allows us to deliver printers and drivers to the users based on their profiles, based on their needs. Then we will definitely focus on some security improvements because as the 10.2 is one of our major releases and probably our next long-term supported version intended for your important customers, we will focus on the really important security improvements which were part of this version. Some of those simply generated as our own initiative, some of them done based on the penetration tests the server is, regularly going through to make sure it's really secured and can be used in the environments where the security is the top priority, which is basically almost every environment. So then we focus on the user synchronization, on the new options. Again, some of those requested by you, some of those added on our own initiative. There are a few things like additional sources or improvements which you can use to get users into the system. We will definitely cover one thing related to the site servers, standard multi-server installation. It's actually not a new feature of the 10.2, but it's so important that we have to highlight it here, because it's basically a way how to replicate the settings of one site server to others without much effort. Then, next one, really important again, going back to the 10.2, and this time we will be talking about the Embedded Terminal version 10.2. There are a few extra features, basically not the major ones, but also quite important, so we have to highlight them as well. And there's one functionality that unfortunately didn't fit to the release of 10.2, so that's why it's marked as an upcoming feature, and that way will be available a little bit later with one of the later releases. Now, of course, there will be a QA session at the end, so please use the QA form, which is part of the Teams meeting, to post any question you may potentially have, and I'll try to answer as many as I can as part of the session, and the potentially missing ones I will then cover later and share it with you. Now, before we will jump into the main topic, as we've been through the agenda, there are actually three words or three expressions which are summarizing the version 10.2. And actually the focus of all those features. The first one is the ease of use. The whole system was really designed to make it much easier for you as the admin or the user to work with the system. Another enhancement is focusing on the security, because that's the major thing, because we're working with an important data. And again, one of our most important buzzwords we are using every time when promoting MyQ, the option to personalize the environment based on the needs of individual users or departments. Now, let me just admit a few more people waiting in the lobby, and we can go on. So let's start with the unexpected thing, that the feature which nobody expected as the main one, but it's actually a really important one, the MyQ X Desktop Client, which has been now completely redone. And we can also say that it's almost like a completely new app, especially because of the main feature we will be presenting today, and that's the printer provisioning. So, what's new first? Now, what you can see at the first sight is the new, let's call it, system integrated look, as it's actually part of the Windows or any other system you'll be using, that it's there, it's not using any special graphics. It actually also reacts on the preference you have set as the view or as the look of your system. So as you can see, it can be in a dark mode, it can be in the light mode, basically following the settings of your OS. Another really important thing I would like to highlight here before we will jump into the main part is the also integration with the MS Entra. So if you've got the MS Entra ID and using that as a synchronization source for your users, you can just let them also authenticate using the desktop client, provided of course they are not part of your domain, because in that case a single sign-on is another option. Now, what you can expect from the MyQ Desktop Client, of course, all the features will be there. So definitely the secure transfer of the job. You will have all the options of the fallback printing. You can rely on a client pooling in the environments where you do not want to send the job to the server. Ideally, for example, if you've got the MyQ installed in the private cloud. So if you've got it in your AWS or in your Azure, this is the way to use the MDC to make sure that all jobs are actually staying in the local network. That'll be the USB monitoring, the option to select additional cost centers, the enforcement of printing rules, and those are available not only in the online mode, but also in a case that the server is down, the client will still remember those, and you can enforce the print rules even in the fallback print. There's the option of some user interaction. There is an option of the user detection or user domain detection. So basically all the features you know about MDC are still there. So that part hasn't changed. But on top of that, we have added one more and the most important feature, which is the printer provisioning and the driver installation. Basically our way how to make sure that every user which is working within the company will have the right printer, right driver, and they will not have to do anything about it. And it's not only about the actual company where, delivering the printers and drivers is, very easy using the standard tools of the domain and other applications, but it can be also used, thanks to the MDC, it can be used in the environments where the user is basically unknown and only have to register in the system and sign in for the first time. But before we will get there, there's one more thing I have to speak about, because it's also important when it comes to the use of the MDC. And that thing is the central management. Now, in the previous versions of the system, when you were actually installing the MDC, I don't want to say it was a pain, but there was a lot of things you had to set, a lot of things that where you potentially can make a mistake. And by that, I mean, for example, when you were installing it remotely as a silent installation using your domain policies or Intune, you have to set the parameters for everything you wanted to use. So it could be the server IP, if different features should be activated or not, which ports should be there, how it should communicate. And that you had to do as part of your Intune or domain policy for every group of users, just to make sure that they have the features they would like to do. Now with version 10.2, you can completely forget about setting all these parameters, because there's just one and only parameter the MDC 10.2 needs, and that's the server IP or its host name. Basically, it needs to know with which server it should start communicating, and that way get all the settings. Because what is now as part of this 10.2 installation is the option that everything is actually managed centrally. And that's the part where I will actually show the first recording, because the best way to actually demonstrate it is to see it live. So we will look at the admin UI. This is the environment which most of the users normally don't see. But let's say we now would like to create our own profile. So that will be the one for our common users. And we just would like to make sure that our users can print, scan, and do everything, but they don't have to really send it to server. So first we will define the IP ranges, the subnets where our users are located. Based on that, it will actually apply the settings. We can also set that certain IP addresses should be excluded, so that way we can apply slightly different profiles for them. Then, depending on the way how you'd like to use it, of course, depending also on the environment, if it should be in a private mode or in the public one. For example, if it's used in a library. Then setup of the login methods, which can be also used using the integrated Windows authentication. And then we'll go to the setup of individual features. In our case, we can set the client spooling or any other option. Like here, that could be a fallback print, where we select to which machine or, multiple machines it should actually release it, how it should release it, if it should enforce all the policies, if it should be using device pooling or just a plain release, or if it should monitor any locally connected devices, for example, on the USB ports. All these settings are now set on the server, not on the client. And same way we can create another profile which will be for our visitors, a profile which will be slightly different, just to cover, completely different scenario. And we know that these users are, for example, in our guest network. That's why also the IP range will be different, and that way we'll ensure that the users that will connect from that network will automatically get slightly different behavior. And that's about how the actual MDC can be provided and can be set within the system. Because now, as I will show on one of my following slides, is the whole magic. Because when I'm there, as you can see, I've got here the server and I've got here two different subnets. The only thing you have to do as a user when the application is installed, you'll just have to go through the initial authentication, and then based on a subnet where you are, the system will actually download the right settings for you and apply them to your MDC. So as an admin, you don't have to care. You will just define the settings as part of the profiles on the server, and the rest is done automatically based on the subnets where the users are actually located. So that's the beginning. Now, the more important part, the actual highlight why the MDC is now becoming a major feature of MyQ, as the functionality everyone was expecting and requesting from us, and that's the printer and driver deployment. Typical situation would be when we've got the installation, when there are multiple different devices of different brands with different settings, different finishing options, typical company where the machines were bought from different tenders at different dealers and stuff. So for these, then it's actually better to use the native drivers with the right settings. Why? That's pretty obvious, because you will have a guaranteed compatibility. You will have all the finishing options needed. You will get the best possible output. So that way, if, for example, if you are printing some graphics, you just have the right driver for it to have everything in a perfect color, perfect shape. And last one is the actual personalization. What can be personalized about drivers? Specific settings like how it should print it, what should be the default settings and stuff. And all that you should be able to deliver to all your users, which managing it centrally for, let's say, 5,000 users could be quite a pain. So that's why this feature was actually developed to allow you to easily put the right specific drivers for different users, different departments, and we can do it by just installing the MDC, and the rest is done automatically. But for that, there are a few things which has to be preset. And let me first explain the way it works. Now, when we are printing in MyQ, you're always printing from your computer to some printing queue on the printing server. Now, if it is done through the MDC just makes sure that it will get the job and will send it over a secure channel using that queue to your server. The very same queue is then at the actual definition of the available printers, where the user can go and release them. So if we will summarize, the printing queue actually means the list of devices on which the user can release their jobs. It actually also means that, a definition of the users or user groups who have access to that printing queue, which as far as now, this was a standard part of any MyQ version. Now, what is new in 10.2 is that queue can actually contain one more thing, and that's the MDC profile. We'll speak about it in more details as I will go on. Just now, a few things what this MDC profile can contain. Now, based on the analysis from the MDC application, I can just analyze all the drivers used within the system, simply download them to the server and create my Windows printers, including all the settings, profiles, finishing options, parameters, everything included on the server, and then deliver it. And by delivering it I will just repeat what I already said. Any user, and doesn't matter if it's a user who's a member of the company, or if it is a visiting guest, or if it is, like in a library or school where you will just come with your computer and would like to start working. The only thing you have to do is just install the MDC. So it can be done using the Intune. It can be done using domain policies, or just simple manual installation where the admin will just provide the installer to the user who came to the library. Once that's done, the user has to be registered in the system to use their account to authenticate, and the whole MyQ system will, based on the access to your printing queues, deliver the right printers, the right drivers, which are there for you, so you can start working with them in your office with the drivers that are exactly for the machines you have access to. Now let's look at that in more details. So we will need here like 3 computers. I've got here the MyQ server, the admin computers, which could be, for example, your technician preparing everything for the customer, and then the actual user's computer. Starting first with the admin's computer, because that's the place where the admin or the technician can prepare all the printers with all the right settings, with the right drivers that you would like to use for all the users within the system. It doesn't have to be there forever, so you can just create it once, and if you need to update it, you can use any other computer again, just using the same procedure I will be just now describing. So let's look at the admin's computer, and this time we will be using the MDC, but I will log in here as an administrator. Actually, one account with administrator rights, and that account, once logged in, will have one special option which normal user doesn't have, and that's the option to capture the drivers. You can actually see it here when I click on the menu. It will actually load all the locally installed printers from which I can select the one I want and just upload the drivers and settings to the server. Like here, for example, there I can rename it to identify it to make sure that I'm just uploading the one I want with the right settings. I can provide a description, and as you can see, it will create the zip file and upload it to the server. This way, I can just capture all potential drivers and settings I have prepared on this computer. So if you will keep them there, you can just then apply them at any customer just by using an MDC that will be connected to their server. And that's it. We have just now captured 3 drivers with the settings from a printers that were created locally. Again, I just would like to highlight the thing that it doesn't contain only the drivers, but also the settings you have applied when creating the printers. So going back, and this time on the server. When I'm on the server, there's a new menu which you've probably not yet seen, and that menu is called Print Drivers, where you are actually able to create different configuration profiles. After refreshing it, you will see that the drivers I have picked on my computer are right here. By double-clicking on that, I can see what version of driver it is for which operating system, and I can create my printer, the printer that will be actually deployed to the user. So like here, MyQ HP print, I'll set the printing queue, which is an important thing because the printing queue is actually the one that then defines who has access to it, and that way if you have access to the queue, you'll be the one who will get the printer installed. So if we will now look at the user's computer, the only thing our user has to do is to log in for the first time. So like that, John Doe will just connect. And as part of that, it will not only apply all the settings based on the profile. So for example, it will create the client spooling and everything. But as you can see here, it's now starting to configure in a printer on his computer. So that way our John, when this process is done, will be ready to print in the environment. So even if this is a guest who's never been working in our company, he will be able to print to the MyQ server. And of course, release it securely. So what you have seen now, it's actually the phase 1 of the printer and driver provisioning. It's the part that focuses on individual users which are either part of our company or even guests. Now the phase 1 is there. On the other hand, we are now still working on the phase 2, which may be even more important for the future, because that one will be about the actual print server build-up. So if you would like to create your own print server, this will be a future for you. But like I said, that's one of the things that will come at a later stage. So that was the first feature, the MyQ Desktop Client and the way to actually get all your drivers to all your users. Now let's focus on other things, things that are also very important, because we will be talking about the security and the ways we have improved that in the version 10.2. Starting first with the most important highlight, and that's the fact that we have increased the minimum version of the TLS to 1.2, which affects basically any component, any API, any connector that communicates with the server, which potentially can mean that some very old devices will no longer work with the server. But of course, it's, you have to select what you want. It will be more secure, or it will be working with the old devices. Now, of course, we don't want to, force you to make a decision if you will stay on some older version or if you will go for a new one. So for those of you who would not have the option to use the TLS 1.2, because still that will be machines that cannot handle it, there is an option of how to, of course, decrease it back to TLS 1.1 as a minimum. It's a thing we definitely do not advise you to do, but the option is there. And if you'll be interested in that, just contact our support. They will be definitely able to help you with that. Another really important thing, which appeared not only in MyQ 10.2, but even in its predecessor, but it's that important that we have to highlight it here. And that's the option to, it's actually we are blocking the option to insert anything using PHP via Web UI. What that means. Now, that PHP is actually used in a few of our processes. Those of you who've been working with the system for quite some time know that, for example, through simple PHP scripting, we can set the behavior of the queues. So, for example, certain application rules, like, for example, if the file is bigger than 50 pages in color, it should automatically be moved to a queue which is connected to A3 devices. Or if you are printing something from the Outlook, Instead of having that in a full color, it should just be in black and white and in duplex. All these things were created using simple PHP scripting. Now, this change, which I'm talking about, is not about actually blocking that functionality. You don't have to be afraid. So if you've used the PHP for this, or for example, for the user interaction, where there was a pop-up message for the user should something need some, action from the user, like selection if it should be duplex or simplex, basically like soft rules. All these are still there. After you upgrade, even the already used PHP scripts are still in your system. They will still be working. The only thing you may notice from the administrator perspective is that you will not be able to change or modify or recreate new scripts. So if you would like to do so, you will have to go to your EasyConfig, deactivate this block, and then you will be able to modify the scripts again. And again, going back to the EasyConfig, you will just block it again to make sure your system is secured. So it's more about real like security, so no one can use it at the moment where you do not want to. Only to edit it, you have to just disable this block for a short period of time. Another thing, which is part of 10.2 and related to security, is then the option that's been requested by some of our customers, and that's the option to actually disable the default * admin account. Now, this account is like a full admin of the system and were used since the beginning of the system. Of course, some users, especially when it comes to security checks, were not really happy that there could be some account which has the full admin rights. So instead of that, such accounts wanted to have their own users with the admin rights, and this one to be disabled. Now, the message for you is, if you want, after you will set up your system, again, using the EasyConfig, you can just easily disable the default * admin and use your admin account instead. Same thing, which is kind of related to it, was that if you had the fresh installation of MyQ, those of you, again, especially techies, that you know that the default password for the * admin was 1234, like super secured password. Now, this one is, again, no longer used. And there's one tricky thing about that, and that is if someone was that clever and was using that in a previous version in 10.1 and upgraded to 10.2, the system will actually recognize it and will erase the password. So what you will have to do, if you would like to log in as the admin, you will have to provide a completely new one after the upgrade. Same way, if it is a fresh installation, the account is created without any password at all, so you'll have to provide it as part of the actual installation process. Last highlight when it comes to security is then related to reports. This one may actually affect some of the older customers if they'll be upgrading and they are using custom reports. Now, to increase the security, we decided that any report, any customized component of the system that should be put in, should be actually encrypted and signed to potentially prevent any, modification of that, and that way putting a malicious code into the system. So from now on, if you would like to use a custom report, it has to be an encrypted and signed copy provided by support. All your previously used custom reports after the upgrade will no longer work. So that was about the security. And now let's focus on one of the most important things, which is there to make the system run. Because to be able to work with MyQ, you must have all your users in the system database. So what has changed when it comes to the synchronization of users and all the settings behind that? So first, we will start with the good old LDAP server, or, LDAP protocol, because there are a few options which were added and one more special way to actually get your users. Starting first with the option of additional filters. So if you're not working with the LDAP server, like your good old Active Directory or any open LDAP, You've got now additional options, additional filterings when it comes to aliases, cards, or pins, which is kind of identical to the options which were present at the CSV file. So basically, you can select what should happen if some other information is found. So if it should be, for example, overwritten from your domain, or if it should not be changed or altered in a case some value is already in the database of the system. Next one. When it comes to the import of information, sometimes you might need to specify that only one part of the actual value you will get from your AD or any other LDAP server should be used. The typical example of that will be the import of cards, where sometimes at some systems the card might be part of some longer value, and you will need only just a specific part of that whole string. For that, we have added the option of regular expression transformation into the synchronization. So what you will do, you will just basically select the attribute you would like to apply to, create the right regular expression to define just the part of the string you would like to get, and the rest the system will apply for every user within the system and just get the right information you would like to get. And the last thing when it comes to the LDAP is the kind of, I will say, a really new thing, because, you know, the synchronization from the Google Workspace was already in MyQ, but it was only part of the central server. There's been a lot of requests to actually change that, because, you know, our initial idea was that it will be used by schools where multi-server will be the most common installation. But, you know, a few of you just wanted to have a standalone, so now the most important thing that's been added as part of the LDAP synchronization is the option to use a Google Workspace also on the standalone server. Now, still in the synchronization, but this time we will be talking about the MS Entra ID. Now, this one was briefly touched in the previous version 10.1, but now in 10.2 it has been enhanced and additional options were added, and I believe some of those quite significant. And I will start actually with the most important one, because in a previous version of the MS Entra ID synchronization, what you had to do in your MS Graph is to create the application to which MyQ can connect and actually synchronize your users. A process which for any advanced admin of the Azure should not be a problem. But also, not every one of us is an Azure expert. I'm not one, definitely. And for us like me, we like to have it sometimes simplified. So now with 10.2, you can actually decide how you will do it. If you will do it the simple way, which, as you can see it now on the screen, you will just select the options you would like to get, and the MyQ application will actually do it for you. So what you will need is just to log in using the Azure admin, grant the rights to our application, and it will create all the connectors, and you will be able to set them up in the few moments. On the other hand, we also understand that this might not be an option for some environments where the security is like a real focus, because we're working with user data. So the old option, where you had to create the application manually, granted all the rights required, and then just provide only the tenant ID, the security, and the application ID, it's still there. It's up to you how would you like to do it. If you would like to have everything simplified where we will do it for you, or if it should be really secured when you will be doing that. Of course, if you're using the option 1 when it's automatic, we're not really able to alter anything there. We'll just have rights to create the connectors. But for some security audits, this could be a potential no-go. So that's why this option is still there. Now, when it comes to the synchronization from the MS Entra ID, there's actually one really important thing which is based on a feedback from the field, and that's the option to have different and additional parameters to actually define the properties of your users. For example, from my perspective, the most important, if you've got the environment which is synchronized from the on-prem AD into the Azure, is to have the on-premise user principal name and other parameters there, simply to be able to work in the environment. So as you can see, you can use now additional parameters, including, for example, the employee ID or all the extension attributes of the system. Same way, like for the LDAP, even here, you can use the regular expression to define or the part of the value you would like to get into the system. Now, as this chapter is not only about users, but also about other components and other connections, there's one more highlight which is kind of related to the Azure, and that's the connector for your OneDrive business. Now, as you can see, both options are here, so you can use our application to create everything, or you can do it manually. But there's just one important switch which I would recommend to use, and you can see it at the bottom of the screen that our application will have access to the OneDrive for Business of all users. Technically, this way, if you use it like that, without additional effort, you can make sure that all your users will be able to scan directly into their OneDrive after the initial setup. So you will just create the connector to Enter ID, create the connector to OneDrive for Business, and your users will be able to authenticate using their Microsoft account and then scan immediately into their OneDrive for Business. Right. One thing which is, from my perspective, really important one, because we're now talking about large installations where you can create a lot of sites, or actually will have to create a lot of sites. Now, the situation as it was before 10.2. You created your central server, you created your site, and then you start setting up the things like the scanning workflows, copy workflows, all the scheduled tasks, print rules, queues, basically all the settings of the system, which probably will be identical for every single site. Now, the techies already know that if you would like to replicate that as part of MyQ, you definitely cannot use the thing that you would use a copy of the server image. So, because that one will create a lot of mess in the system. Creating the whole site again and applying all the settings again is really annoying. So, this is actually not a new feature, but like I said, that's been a feature which has not been promoted properly, so I just would like to use this opportunity where I've got this nice audience here to explain it again and to show you that we've got this feature through which you can easily recreate hundreds of sites with the identical settings, and it will not take you more than 2 minutes. So what we will do, like in the previous case, you will set one site, you will connect it to the central server, you will apply all the settings you would like to have, create the right profiles, all the scanning buttons, all the rules, policies, you name it, you'll set it. Now, once that's done, to create another site, the only thing which you will actually need is to create a backup of the database. So you will go to the easy config and press the button to create a backup of the database. Then you can just create a new, fresh server, and there, using the easy config, you can just use the new button below the full restore, and that's the option to restore only the settings. Now, what this button is actually doing is that it will erase all the settings which should not be present on the site or on the computer or on the MyQ, which you would like to recreate. So something which could potentially make a problem. So all your user data or settings which would make a mess when it comes to the communication with the central server are erased. On the other hand, all the settings, especially the annoying ones when you are creating the terminal actions, the buttons and everything, will stay there. All the personalized things, all the reports and stuff will be in the system, and that way you can actually recreate all the sites. What it will also do is when you will finish this, special restore of a backup or restore of only the settings, it will actually connect your computer based on a detected hostname to the central, download one license, and make sure that you can continue with your setup by synchronizing the users, and then you've got the site created. And that way you can easily, like I said, create multiple different sites with the identical settings by simply creating an image. But not the image of your virtual server, but creating an image of your database. And maybe one more thing to highlight, like I said, this is a functionality which has been in the system for quite some time. So definitely you'll be able to find it in the latest build of 8.2, 10.1, and now 10.2 as well. Another really important component of the system, and that is the MyQ Embedded Terminal. Unfortunately, not yet released as of now, but we are working hard to make sure you can get it as soon as possible. So let's look at it a little bit closer. Now, as you can see, the actual look has been slightly redesigned to make it more convenient for the user. And the same thing applied when it comes to the actual UI when you're there. So now the descriptions of the buttons are in the middle. We've got a slightly different icon, slightly different options on the screen. But that's not the main highlight of this version. The main highlight is, like I said at the beginning, in a part when we are focusing on the personalization, on making sure that the user would like to work with the system because it's easier and it's convenient for them. So, what is that about? I'll be speaking actually about the Easy Scan. Every Easy Scan is actually a combination of a lot of different settings, parameters. You know it. There's a lot of things you can set. And there are a few settings which the admin can actually also unlock like that. So the user can actually change it when they are at the embedded terminal. Now, the limitation of that functionality in a previous versions of MyQ were that, yes, the user was able to change the settings. They were able to apply their own settings. Still good. But what was kind of frustrating for them was that whatever you changed, whatever you defined on your own, was available only till the end of the active session. You are not able to save it anywhere. So if you needed something extra, you either had to ask your admin, which probably just, ignored you if you don't have a really good relationship with him or with her, or you would have to set it up every time. And as you've probably guessed, the new functionality of the 10.2 embedded is that now you can actually create your own favorite action. So what you will get is a standard embedded terminal the way your administrator defined it for you. And then there is an extra menu, which is available if you will swipe a little bit to the right. And it appears like that, where by clicking on the plus icon, you can actually create your own buttons with your own features the way you prefer them. And that's available for every single user. So as you can see, my admin has prepared for me 3 buttons: Easy Scan OneDrive, Easy Copy, and Easy Print OneDrive. And each of these I can actually modify to make sure that I actually do what I need for my daily routine. Which sounds good, but maybe some of you who are really into security can just now come with an idea. But what if by that I will get access to something I shouldn't? Or not me, but the user. And that's the other part, because they can do it actually only within the boundaries set by the admin. So every user can set their own buttons, but only based on the options you as an administrator will actually provide them. So you don't have to be afraid about the security, about anything, being able to leak if you will not set it the way that the user will be able to change it. Let's now focus on a few more minor features, but they are kind of important as well. So let's call them cherries on top. Starting first with the functionality where if you will have an environment that fully works only in the environment in the IP version 6, you can now go with MyQ 10.2. Of course, it requires all the components, including the embedded terminal, to make it work. But MyQ is now ready to work in all environments, and doesn't matter if it's IP version 4, the combination of IP version 4 and IP version 6, or just simply only the IP version 6 based environments. Another minor thing, but can have a huge impact on the user, is the part when you will allow the user to set up the connection to the cloud storage, basically giving them the button to connect to a cloud storage. And we're not talking about the OneDrive for Business, because as you already know, that one can be fully automated during the initial sync. This time it could be, for example, their own Google Drive. But the thing is, they don't have that connected to the system. So when they will press the button and scan, there has been actually a request which is done now as part of MyQ. It will send the user an email where they can either use this button to connect to their Google Drive directly into the system, or it doesn't have to be Google Drive. It can be their personal OneDrive or any other cloud storage which is part of MyQ. Or the other option is, if they do not want to have that connected, they can just download the file using the secure link. As you can see, that one is actually stored on the server for 24 hours and it's fully encrypted. So no one can actually access it except for the rightful owner. Another really important highlight of the version is that from now on, there is a possibility that you will be able to use 2 different versions of the same embedded application. Now, in previous system, there was only a possibility to have one at a time. Now, if you will, for example, need to upgrade, or will have a combination of a newer and older devices within one fleet, you can just have 2 versions of the very same application. Let's say this would be a Coursera embedded. So you will have Coursera 10.2 and Coursera 8.2 running at the same time, and you will just, based on the profile, select which device will use which. Now, to make that run, the major thing is that you would need that at least one of these would be the embedded 10.2, or potentially in the future a higher version than that. Another of the extra features is focusing on the user and the registration of cards. Before the 10.2, if you have used an unknown card on a reader connected to the machine, it would either reject your operation because it's unknown, or if it's activated, it would create an anonymous account. A thing that could be used in some, let's say, hotels or some place where we are giving a limited functionality to the user, like, for example, printing from the USB drive or simple copying. Nice feature, but it needed an enhancement. And that enhancement actually appeared as part of 10.2, because that's the ability to actually not only create an anonymous account, but through this process, ask the user to provide their credentials and to register it under their account. So if you will come with an unknown card and this functionality is active, instead of creating an anonymous account, the system will just ask you to provide your credentials to the account which is already in the system, and then the card will end up registered on your account. And as I've mentioned at the beginning of my webinar, there's one functionality which is still under development but will be there soon. Now, when it comes to the printing, we'll still print through the server, printing to the different machines. And if we have the multi-vendor fleet, one of the options of how to handle it would be the already mentioned printer provisioning and driver installation through the MDC. But you know, for someone, this might not be an option. This might be for environments where you would like to specify specific settings per department, per different machines. But sometimes, to make it fast and simple, what you will need is actually universal printing driver. As it was announced previously, even such feature is being added into the system. So as part of one of the future releases, you can definitely expect the universal printing driver to be part of the MyQ, which can be used using all the options of the printer and driver delivery, even the printer provisioning through the MDC. And that's also pretty much everything I've got here for you today. There's maybe one last thing I would have to really mention. It's actually not on any of my slides, but could be kind of important for those of you who've been working with the MyQ for quite some time. Now, and I mean quite some time, because we're talking about the old licensing now. Before we had started using the simplified licensing we have now, we had some old licenses like Business, Business Pro, and old codes where the actual item code started with some digits, either 5, 4, or 6. Important thing is that the MyQ 10.2 is the first version of MyQ, which will now completely reject these old keys. Now, majority of you already have been through the migration and you are using the new license keys. But just to let you know, because it's quite important, if you have, for some reason, at some customer have not yet migrated your licenses, this is the right time. Because the MyQ 10.2 will now accept only the new keys, starting with the IKA at the beginning. And that's, like I said, pretty much everything for today. So thank you for very much for being with us today. And let's now focus on your questions.